The restaurant was too quiet for a Friday night. Soft piano music floated through the air, polite and distant, like it didn't want to disturb anyone important. Daniel Roth sat alone at a table near the window, his jacket draped neatly over the chair beside him, his phone face down on the white linen cloth. Outside, the city glowed with restless energy, headlights streaming by, people laughing on sidewalks, couples arguing softly as they walked. Inside, Daniel felt cut off from all of it, like he was watching life through thick glass. He stared at his untouched glass of water. Condensation slid slowly down its side, pooling at the base. He hadn't been thirsty anyway. He rarely was these days. Hunger, thirst, excitement. Those sensations had become distant, dulled by years of routine and responsibility. Meetings, flights, contracts, numbers. Always numbers. His company was doing better than ever, expanding into new markets, earning him recognition in magazines and business journals. People called him visionary, brilliant, self-made. None of them knew how empty those words sounded to him at night. He came to this restaurant often, not because he enjoyed the food, but because no one here asked questions. The staff knew him as the quiet man who tipped well and preferred to be left alone. They didn't ask why he always ate alone or why he sometimes sat for long minutes staring at nothing before touching his meal. Tonight was one of those nights. Daniel glanced at his phone, though he already knew there would be no new messages that mattered. Business emails could wait. There was no one checking in on him, no one asking how his day had been. His parents were gone, his marriage had ended years ago in a silence heavier than any argument, and he had no children. He had told himself that sacrifice was necessary for success. Now, sitting alone in a room full of quiet luxury, he wasn't so sure what the success had been for. The door to the restaurant opened, letting in a brief rush of cold air and street noise. Daniel barely looked up at first, assuming it was another couple or a late reservation. But then he heard a shift in the room, a subtle change in energy. Conversations paused. Fork slowed. Someone cleared their throat awkwardly. He lifted his gaze. Near the entrance stood a woman holding the hand of a small boy, with another child half hidden behind her worn coat. The woman's hair was pulled back loosely, strands escaping around her tired face. Her coat was too thin for the season, frayed at the cuffs. The children looked even more out of place. The boy couldn't have been more than 7 or 8, his sneakers scuffed and several sizes too small. The younger child, a girl, clutched a faded stuffed animal, its ear missing. They didn't belong here, not in a place where the cheapest dish cost more than most people spent on groceries in a day. The hostess froze for a moment, her polite smile slipping as she tried to decide what to do. Other diners shifted uncomfortably, some pretending not to see, others watching openly with disapproval. Daniel felt a familiar tightening in his chest. He had seen scenes like this before, outside office buildings, at traffic lights, near subway entrances. Usually, he looked past them. Not out of cruelty, he told himself, but out of helplessness. He couldn't save everyone. That was the excuse he had repeated for years. The woman approached the hostess slowly, her shoulders tense, as if bracing for rejection. Daniel couldn't hear what she said, but he saw her lips move carefully, respectfully. The hostess shook her head, glancing toward the dining area, clearly uncomfortable. The woman nodded, as if she had expected that answer, and turned to leave. As she did, the little boy looked around the room. His eyes were wide, curious, not afraid. He took in the sparkling lights, the tall glasses, the neatly dressed people. His gaze passed over Daniel, and for a brief moment, their eyes met. Daniel looked away instinctively, but something tugged at him, pulling his attention back. The boy wasn't begging. He wasn't crying. He simply looked hungry. Not just for food, but for warmth, for something ordinary that other children took for granted. Before Daniel fully understood what he was doing, he raised his hand slightly and caught the hostess's attention. She turned, relief flickering across her face as she walked over. "Please," Daniel said quietly, his voice steady despite the sudden pounding of his heart. "Have them sit here. I'll take care of it." The hostess hesitated for only a second before nodding. She turned toward the woman and gestured them forward. The woman's eyes widened in surprise. She looked from the hostess to Daniel, clearly unsure. "It's okay," Daniel said gently, meeting her gaze. "Please." Slowly, cautiously, the woman approached his table with the children. Up close, Daniel noticed the deep lines of exhaustion around her eyes, the way she held herself protectively, as if shielding the kids from a world that had already been too unkind. The boy stood close to her side, while the little girl peeked out from behind her coat. "Thank you," the woman said softly. Her voice trembled, not with weakness, but with restrained emotion. "We don't want to cause any trouble." "You're not," Daniel replied. "Sit. Please." They took the seats across from him, perching at the edge as though ready to stand and leave at the first sign of disapproval. The table suddenly felt smaller, warmer. Daniel realized how long it had been since he'd shared a meal with anyone. The waiter approached, professional but clearly curious. Daniel ordered without looking at the menu. He told the waiter to bring whatever the children wanted, whatever was warm and filling. The woman tried to protest, but Daniel shook his head. "It's fine," he said. "Really?" As they waited, an awkward silence settled over the table. Daniel didn't know what to say. He wasn't good at small talk, especially not in moments that mattered. The boy, however, seemed less concerned. "Are you rich?" the child asked suddenly, tilting his head. The woman's eyes widened in horror. "I'm so sorry," she said quickly. "Eli." Daniel surprised himself by smiling. It wasn't forced or polite. It came naturally, stretching muscles he hadn't used in a long time. "I suppose I am," he said honestly. Eli nodded thoughtfully, as if that confirmed something important. "My mom says rich people are lonely sometimes." Daniel's smile faded slightly, replaced by a quiet ache. He glanced at the woman, who looked mortified, but there was something else in her expression too, truth. "Your mom sounds wise," Daniel said after a moment. The food arrived soon after, filling the table with steam and comforting smells. The children's eyes lit up. Eli's sister let out a small gasp of delight, hugging her stuffed animal tighter. The woman watched them eat, relief softening her features, though she herself barely touched a plate. Daniel found himself watching them more than his own food. The way the woman cut the children's meals into smaller pieces. The way Eli carefully wiped his sister's mouth with a napkin, serious beyond his years. There was love here, real and tangible, despite the circumstances. Something Daniel realized he hadn't felt in a very long time. As the meal came to an end, the children looked full and content, leaning back in their chairs with sleepy smiles. The woman finally met Daniel's eyes again. "I don't know how to thank you," she said quietly. "This means more than you know." Daniel was about to respond when he noticed Eli doing something strange. The boy had slipped off his chair and stood by the table, small fingers working carefully at something in his pocket. He glanced up at Daniel once, then placed a small object gently beside Daniel's plate. It was folded, worn at the edges, and clearly important. Before Daniel could ask what it was, Eli smiled, a simple, sincere smile, and climbed back into his chair as if nothing unusual had happened. Daniel stared at the object on the table, a strange chill running through him, as though something deep inside had just been touched. He had no idea yet that whatever the child had left behind would change everything he thought he understood about loneliness, kindness, and his own life.